Thank you for visiting our YouTube channel. We are excited to share our content with you and hope you find it interesting and informative. Make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our latest videos and don't forget to leave a comment to let us know what you think. We value our community and appreciate your support and look forward to connecting with you through our channel. In the first video of our series, we discussed the ways in which the Power Platform pipelines differs from other ALM tools. We also provided an overview of the deployment pipeline configuration app and concluded by discussing how to select environments for various tenants. In this video, we'll go through the steps of configuring and running pipelines in the host and dev environments. We will demonstrate the process of deploying pipelines and discuss ways to monitor and secure them. Before installing and getting started with the pipelines, make sure you created the environments properly in the tenant. So we need to have at least 3 environments: host environment, dev environment, and the target production environment. Once the host environment is created, we need to install the Power Platform pipeline application in the host environment. In order to do that, sign into Power Platform Admin Center. Under the Dynamic 365 apps, type and search Power Platform Pipelines. Select the Power Platform Pipelines apps, click on Install. So once you click on Install, the pop-up screen will get displayed. Install the Power Platform Pipelines and it will ask you for selecting an environment. Select the host environment over here and click on Install. This will install all the necessary components to the host environment. As soon as the Power Pipeline app is installed on the host environment, two main solutions are added on the host environment: App Deployment Model App Solution, App Deployment Metadata Solution. These solutions help us to automate the deployment process of our environments. App Deployment Model App. This solution contains the model-driven app and the required component used to configure the state. App Deployment Model App. This solution contains the model-driven app and the required components used to configure and set the deployment stages. Inside the App Deployment Model App, we have a model-driven app deployment pipeline configuration, which we will be seeing in the coming session. So this model-driven app is used to configure and run the pipeline. We also have dashboards, sitemaps, tables, and web resources which are helpful in order to automate the deployment process. Another solution which is used for automating the deployment is Microsoft App Deployment Metadata. This solution contains all the custom APIs, plugins, security roles, and tables related for carrying out the automated deployment. Microsoft advised not to customize any plugin or any web resources inside these solutions. If you customize any of these components inside these solutions, then the pipeline won't work. Till now we have seen how to install the Power Platform Pipelines app inside the host environment. Once the Power Platform Pipeline app gets installed, what are the solutions that are generated by default? Once the Power Platform Pipeline app gets installed on the host environment, a model-driven app called Deployment Pipeline Configuration app will be installed on the host environment as a part of the solution. So this Deployment Pipeline Configuration app will help us to configure the pipeline setup and deployments inside the host environment. We'll be configuring all the environments that will participate for the pipeline, and we'll be carrying out the deployment steps inside this Deployment Pipeline Configuration app. Right. Let's get started with the configuring the deployment pipelines in the host environment. Copy paste all the environment IDs of all environments like dev, prod, QA participating in the pipelines to a clear text editor such as Notepad. We'll be needing this later. To find the environment ID, just go to Power Platform Admin Center and select the environments. Under the details pane, we can find the environment ID. Navigate to Power Apps, select the host environment. Under the apps, click on Deployment Pipeline Configuration Model Driven app. When you run the Deployment Pipeline Configuration app, we can see sections like Overview, Pipeline Setup and Deployments. Under the Pipeline Setup, we have environments and pipelines, which will be helpful for configuring and running the pipelines. The pipeline dashboard will have the views like active deployment pipelines and inactive deployment pipelines. Under the deployments, we have run history and solution artifacts. The run history section is the place to see all the deployment history. Inside the solution artifact section, we can see all the details regarding the deployment artifacts. Under the pipeline setup, click environments. Inside the environment section, click on new to add the deployment environments. So once you click on new, under the general section of new deployment environment, add all the environment details one by one. First, add the details of the dev environment. Next, if you have the QA environment, add the details of the QA environment after saving the dev environment. Next, carry out the same steps for the production environment. In the new deployment environment section, we have name, environment type and environment ID. Enter the name for the environment record. It's always the good idea to include the same name as the actual environment. Under the environment type, select either development environment or target environment. Development environment is for all the source environments where unmanaged solutions will get developed. The target environment is for QA and production environments where the managed solution artifacts will get deployed. Once you entered all the details, click on Save and refresh the form. You need to verify whether the validation status of the form is success. Once you save the form, you can see the validation status is success after this deployment pipeline validated the environment. Once you click on Save, this app will validate the deployment details and it will provide you the validation status as success. We need to repeat this step for the other environments like the QA and production environments. Once you entered all the details, we should be having 2 to 3 entries under this environments. Right now we have only 2 entries since we want to keep this deployment as simple. So we will be having only the dev environment and the target production environment. Once the environment details are updated under the environment section, next we need to configure and set up the pipeline. We need to set up the deployment stages for target environments and we need to add the development environment. In order to do that, select pipelines on the left navigation pane and then select new to create a new deployment pipeline. Under general, enter the name for the pipeline and we can optionally specify the description for the pipeline. Once you click on Save, the link deployment grid will be visible. We need to add the existing development environment to this linked development environment so that the development environments will be associated with this pipeline. Note that a pipeline must have at least one development environment and one stage before it can run. To add the development environment to the linked development environments, click on 3 dots or click on New Development Environment. Right? You can choose either of these 2 options and select the development environment from the lookup records and add it to the linked development environments. Once you add the development environment from the lookup records, we can see that the existing development environment has been added under the linked development environments. Next step is to add the deployment stages. So far we have configured the name and description for the pipeline. We have associated dev environment with the linked deployment environments. In order to carry out the process to the target environments, so we need to configure the deployment stages under the deployment stages section. In the deployment stages, we need to add the target environments like QA or prod. In this section, we'll be adding only the prod as a deployment stage. If you have QA environment, we can add one more entry over here for the QA environment. Go to deployment stages, click on new deployment stage, quick create deployment stage pop-up will appear. Under the quick create, we can specify the name, description of the deployment stage, and we have two other columns, previous deployment stage and target environment deployment environment ID. The previous deployment stage is an optional step. We need to specify a deployment stage that must be deployed to before deploying to the current stage. For example, when we are creating a production stage, we can add a test stage as a previous deployment stage. But right now we are adding the production deployment stage. Since we don't have the QA environment, we are directly adding the target production environment stage. So we can leave this step as a empty and proceed to add the target deployment environment ID as a production environment ID. If you have a QA environment and if you are configuring this deployment stage for the production environment, then we need to provide the QA deployment stage as a previous deployment stage. Enter the target deployment environment ID and click on save. So once the deployment stage is added, like the target environment is added, we can see the target environment details under the deployment stages. With this, the configuration of the pipeline under deployment stages has been completed. Next, we need to go to the dev environment and run the pipelines. The configuration part of the deployment pipeline has been completed in the host environment. Now we need to switch to dev environment to run the pipelines. Switch to dev environment. To deploy a solution using pipeline, go to solutions and select any unmanaged solution. For this demo, I created a solution called PL Power Platform. This solution contains the Power Automate and the other required components for the Power Automate, like the connection references and other things. Click on your solution, and in the solution, we can see one more group has been added. It's called pipelines. This is visible because we added this development environment as a linked development environment in the previous sections. Under the pipelines, we can see there are two sections. One is details pane and another one is run history. So in the details pane, we can see the deployment stages. Like right now we have only two environments, like two stages. One is for development, the source environment, which contains the unmanaged solution. And then the target environment is the production environment. So from the development environment, we are pushing this solution to the target environment. If you see inside the target environment, we have a button called deploy here. On click of that button, the automated deployment will get initiated, and the solution of this unmanaged solution will be exported as a managed solution and will get deployed to the target environment. Select the stage to deploy. Right now the target environment is the production environment. Click deploy here. Then select next. This will initiate the validation of the solution against the production environment. The validation can be referred as a pre-flight checks. We will check the missing dependencies and other common issues which might cause the deployment failure. Click on next and we'll check the pre-flight conditions against the target environment. If there are any connection or environment variables, we'll be prompted to provide those details and click on next. After the validation is successful, then we can initiate the automated deployment on click of deploy. Once you click on the deploy button, the deployment will get initiated, the automatic deployment will get initiated, and it will be in the in progress stage. Under the details pane, we can see that it is currently deploying to the target version. Once the deployment is completed, we can go to the run history and see all the details regarding the deployment. Under the run history, we have a status column which will say the deployment status. Right now the deployment has been succeeded, but if there is a failure status, this status will be showed as failure. This ends our demo of steps for running the pipeline. Next, we will see how to manage and monitor the pipelines in the host environment. In addition to the pipeline space in the solution area inside the development environment, we can navigate to the deployment pipeline configuration app in the host environment for managing and monitoring the pipeline deployments. Switch back to host environment, click on deployment pipeline configuration app. So this deployment pipeline configuration app is a central view for all the deployment activity. It also provides the audit history where a certain solution version is deployed as well as who initiated the request. We can also view error logs, validation results and deployment settings, environment variables and connections that are provided during the deployment. We can retain backups of all the solution artifacts based on the version numbers. We can schedule bulk delete jobs to remove unwanted data and conserve database capacity. We have a pipeline dashboard under this app which will allow us to visualize the deployment metrics. Inside the pipeline dashboard, we can also build our own reports using the data stored within the host environment. Click on pipeline dashboard under the overview. We can see the pipeline dashboard displays the dashboard view of all the active deployment pipelines, run history chart. This dashboard allows us to visualize the deployment metrics. And also here, if you click on new, we can also create our own reports based on the data. For managing the deployment files which has been carried out during the deployment process, under the deployment configuration app, we have a section called deployments. Under the deployments, we have a group called solution artifacts. Click on the solution artifacts. This solution artifacts contains all the artifacts details that were processed during the deployment stages. On click of each entry, we have a different sections like general, deployment information and related. Under the general section, we have the name, who is the owner of that particular deployment, and what is the artifact number, and we have a zip file, manage zip file. When the artifact file has been generated, all the details will be present under the general section. So far we have seen the steps to configure and run the pipelines. Let's recap. So in order to use the Power Platform pipelines, log into the admin center and click on Dynamic 365 apps and search for Power Platform pipelines. Choose the Power Platform pipelines and click on install. And choose the necessary environments. You need to select the host environments and click install. Once this Power Platform pipelines has been installed, then we need to go to the host environment for configuring the source and target environments and setting up the pipelines. Go to the host environment. Then once the pipeline app has been installed, we can see that a new app called Deployment Pipeline Configuration app is created. This deployment pipeline configuration app is of type model driven app. Play this app to configure all the settings that are needed for setting up the stages for the deployment. Once you run that deployment pipeline configuration app, we can see in the left pane we have so many groups, like we have an overview group, pipeline setup group, and deployments group. Under the overview group we have a pipeline dashboard. So this pipeline dashboard is used for displaying the activity dashboard view for all the activity for the pipelines, for this host environment pipelines. We can see the deployment pipeline, active deployment pipelines when this deployment has carried out, and we can also see the chart view of bar chart view of the run history of total deployments that has been done by the target environments, right? We can create this dashboard. We can create a new dynamic 365 dashboard for configuring the new pipeline dashboard based on your requirements. Under the pipeline setup, we have environments. This environment is the place where we'll be setting up all the environment details like dev, prod, QA, the environments which are needed for participating in the pipeline. So once we set up the environment details, then we need to click on the pipelines. Inside these pipelines, we need to configure the deployment stage for deploying the pipelines. Under the general, you need to provide the name and description for the pipeline and click on save. So once you save this, then we can able to see there is a section called link development environments. Under this link development environments, we can add our dev environments. So we can add the name, environment type as development environment, and then we can specify the environment ID of the development environment and save and close. This will save the development environment, right, for building all the necessary changes. Next is deployment stages. Under the deployment stages, we can add the target environment, right? So click on new deployment stage. This will open up the quick create deployment stage where we can mention all the details like name, description, and the previous deployment stage. If this is your first deployment stage, like if this is the QA, then we need to left it as blank. Then if you have 3 environments like dev, QA, and prod, then you need to, if you are configuring this pipeline for prod, then you need to specify the deployment stage, the previous deployment stage as QA. But if you have only 2 environments to deploy, like development to prod directly, then you need to leave this previous deployment stage as blank. Provided target environment production environment ID over here and save and close. So once you configure this deployment stage, we can head over to the development environment to run and deploy the solutions to the targeted environments. Go to the development environment, click on solutions, and click on solutions in the left pane and go inside the solution. Now you can see there is a new option that has been added under the solutions called pipelines. Under this pipelines, we have a detail section and run history section. So under the detail sections, we can now see that there are 2 stages available. One is the deployment, one is development, and another one is the target environment, which we configured earlier. If you need to deploy the solution which we selected, which is the current solution, if you need to deploy this solution to this target environment, then just click deploy here. This will validate the changes of the current solution and will check against the target environment, and if all the changes and conditions are met, then it will deploy the solutions. Click on next. We'll pre-check the validations criteria for the development environment solution, and it will export the solution as a managed package, and it will save it under the solution artifact of the host environment. Once that is done, then it will deploy the managed solution to a target environment. Just click deploy. If you click deploy, it will create an automated deployment for the target environment, and you can check the status over here. Currently deploying version 1.0.0.2. So once the deployment is completed, you can click on the run history to check the details of the deployment. It will take a minute or two. So once the deployment is completed, we can go and check whether the deployment status is success or failure. Right now you can see the deployment has been succeeded for the version 1.0.0.2. We can go to the target environment and check whether the solution has been working properly. This ends the demo. Let's see what are the security roles that are available for the Power Platform pipelines. Pipeline security is managed within the host environment by assigning the security roles. Additionally, users must currently have access to all the environments associated with a pipeline in order to create or run the pipeline. When you install the Power Platform Pipelines applications, two security roles were added to the default solution: Deployment Pipeline User and Deployment Pipeline Administrator are the two security roles that has been added by default. With Deployment Pipeline User role, we can grant access to run one or more pipelines. It doesn't grant access to create, edit or delete pipelines, but it grants access to run one or more pipelines. If you want to create, edit or delete the pipelines, then you must have Deployment Pipeline Administrator role. The Deployment Pipeline Administrator role grants full privileges to all the pipeline. It also grants access to run all the pipelines associated within the current host. The Administrator Security role doesn't grant privileges to perform other activities within the host environment. We can assign Deployment Pipeline Administrator Security role to users or Azure AD active groups within the host environment. In order to share the pipelines with makers, we need to assign environmental makers the Deployment Pipeline User Security role within the host environment. This ends our session. Let's recap. So far we have seen how to install the app in the host environment, how to configure pipelines in the host environment, how to run pipelines in the dev environment, and how to initiate the deployment to the target environments. We also seen how to monitor the pipelines in dev and host environments, and what are the security rules that are available for the Power Platform pipelines in order to share with users. Please feel free to subscribe to our channel. Thanks again for stopping by.